All right, everybody. Thanks for being here this evening. I am Jack Carey, your host here at Paranormal Planet, and I appreciate you being with us this evening. I'm the author of the book Paranormal Planet, Bigfoot Unleashed, American Sorcerer, and soon to be out my fourth book, which is titled The Serpent's Key. And I'm going to, well, in the book, I trace the antediluvian, pre-flood, pre-Noah's flood origins of the ancient mystery schools and trace them all the way up to a very real modern day mystery that has yet to be solved. So I look forward to that in the coming months, and hopefully you guys will too. Got a very interesting and exciting show for you tonight. This is one of those shows I like to talk about, subject I like to talk about every time about this year. This is the time of year when people are starting to make their summer vacation plans, etc., and they'll be going out to the various national parks and different wildlife areas, camping and what have you. And it's in this period of the year, obviously, when there are more people in the woods, where more people go missing. It is my belief, and that of quite a few researchers, that at least some of these missing people could, in fact, be predated on by cryptid creatures. The evidence for that is a lot, and I'll be presenting some of that this evening. First of all, I wanted to let you guys know, give you a little news update in the UFO world. So the Pentagon's released another 1,500 pages of UFO material. And some of those reports, and this is now out there on the internet by mainstream media, news outlets, even on television. But according to some of these reports, oh, thank you, Cayman. Thanks a lot, Cayman. I appreciate it. Producer here was like, Cayman, it's great. Thank you. You're awesome. I see you on there. I appreciate your support for the show. But you got it? You can see, okay. But the interesting thing about the cryptid animals and missing people is not only just the evidence for them. Well, I'll let you see an actual eyewitness account of a Native American woman who had a very interesting encounter. It might be a seminal case when considering this. But this new Pentagon report's 1,500 pages, and in it talks about the effects of UFOs on human beings. Some of those were radiation burns. I've talked about Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford being approached by the CIA. This is all published and out there, to study the brain damage that occurred to quite a few military personnel who had close encounters, as well as some civilians that they studied. That brain damage was described as being profound. Nobody yet knows why that is caused, but you can sort of infer that whatever this is, whatever these UFOs are, they are somehow scanning people's minds. And I say that because all of these pilots that were filming and around the Tic Tac UFO were all told to rendezvous at a certain point, and that was given out and not communicated across the radio. And this craft actually went to that exact point, as though it had read their minds, and it was those people, some of them, that had suffered this brain damage. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So tonight, cryptids and missing people, of course, the and pardon the pun, but the 800-pound gorilla of the cryptid world is Bigfoot. Everybody knows. And if you've read my unified field theory of paranormal activity, the theory stipulates that all bipedal humanoid cryptid animals have to, in fact, have some sort of ET connection or origin. And we recently talked about the hitchhiker effect and the idea that a lot of these intelligence agents who were a part of the OSAP program at the Pentagon studying the paranormal effects of the UFO phenomenon had this sort of virus of paranormal activity follow them. It spread to the people around them and their family, and then to their friends. And it seemed to be a wide array of paranormal activity, everything from material objects popping into existence in people's homes, and then back out again to one gentleman who had his family had a experience twice in 1 week with a DogMan. It's interesting because recently they just discussed that case on a radio interview that's out there. I believe that was on Coast to Coast. So, and I mention all of this because if Bigfoot is part of the hitchhiker effect, and like the Dogman that they saw and believed to be part of this hitchhiker effect, if that's the case, then we shouldn't come across cases like the one that I found that to me seems like a seminal case. And I'll explain what I mean. But in this particular case, and in the hitchhiker effect, well, let's say in the hitchhiker effect, it's inferred by the phenomenon itself to manifest around humans for the reason of them seeing it. If that were the case with Bigfoot, we shouldn't have a case like the one that I'm about to talk about. And in this case, there was a skipper of his own charter boat in Alaska. And one night he pulled into a quiet little cove to anchor up for the night. He and a couple of crew members put some shrimp or something on their grill, and they were going to eat dinner and go to bed. And as they were sitting there, the captain noticed a huge grizzly bear come strolling out of the woods up to the coastline. He said that the bear, he estimated if it had stood upright, would be around 11 feet tall. So you can just imagine how big, how massive of apex predator that is. And in Alaska, the apex predator is the grizzly bear. Nothing even comes close to how ferocious, how strong, and how mean they can be. And, quite frankly, just rip a human being to pieces in seconds. So this grizzly bear walks onto the beach, and the captain's watching it, and it raises its nose to the air and it begins to sniff. And he said it did something he's never seen a grizzly bear do ever in his entire life on the Alaskan coast. This thing, he said, took 1-2 steps and then bolted faster than any grizzly that he had any bear. He said, I didn't know bears could even move that fast. And right away, my jaw dropped because he knew that there's nothing that should scare a grizzly like that. Well, the bush begins to move, and sure enough, this upright, walking, completely covered in hair Sasquatch, he estimated to be around 9 feet tall, walked onto the beach and began to just look at them. And so my point about this particular case at this point is that if this were somehow part of the hitchhiker effect, that creature in those woods, apparently hunting this grizzly bear, wouldn't be there if there were no humans to see it and say, hey, you know what I mean? And I don't believe that the hitchhiker effect was there in that cove with those people. I think they just happened upon a random case of a Sasquatch actually hunting prey. And in this case, just imagine how ferocious, how strong, uh, and deadly you have to be to scare an 11-foot grizzly bear. That's very interesting. And it correlates, however, to some work, some field work that I was a part of in the Chuska Mountains, whereby we were able to retrieve some scat, some Bigfoot scat. And in that scat, when it was examined, there was dark fur. When they did an analysis on the dark fur, it turned out to be black bear. So whatever this Bigfoot, they believe, had killed and eaten a grizzly bear. So it's because of that I believe that this case stands outside of the idea of the hitchhiker effect, and that Sasquatch is like the DogMan and apparently a part of the hitchhiker effect. True, maybe the entity behind the hitchhiker effect is a mimic, like Colm Kelleher, the lead scientist of the OSAP program and lead scientist at the Skinwalker Ranch under NIDS, said that this phenomenon is a shapeshifter, his exact words. He even brings up the fact that whatever this is, it can take the shape of, say, a black helicopter. And they have documented that. That's just amazing to me. But this looks like something outside of what's occurring there. Like this was a real animal wandering around the woods and they just happened to see it hunting a bear. And that's something that I've been kind of debating in my mind because in Bigfoot Unleashed, I chronicle a mountain of evidence showing all of the cases that had an apparent ET connection, as well as presenting some pretty damning evidence as to the role of Sasquatch in possible missing person cases. Now, another little side note about this case is that the footage of the interview of the gentleman was given to a expert in what's called micro expressions, and this lady is hired by the CIA as a lie detector, basically. Her technique is actually considered to be more accurate than a modern day lie detector. And she uses facial recognition software that detects tiny little movements in the face and certain muscles that they know trigger every single time somebody lies, and the computer doesn't miss. And in this particular case, she was utilized to examine the footage of this captain telling his story, and she determined that he, in fact, was telling the truth. So, for me, that case is wrapped up in a bow, and it stands outside the idea of these creatures somehow being part of the hitchhiker effect. And because of that, Sasquatch might, as I've theorized in the past, because of disappearing track lines, might in fact be a creature that is being abducted, much like humans, for their amazing DNA. It could just be that humans and these creatures, we know that they're half human, half Homo sapien, so it could very well be that they're interested in their DNA, much like they are ours. So I'm going to bring up a lady, and this lady she's a Chinglet Native American, First Nations people, and she's recounts a story of something that occurred to her as a little girl, and I wanted to show it to you in her own words. So I'm going to bring her up here, and you're going to listen to what she has to say. Okay. So, the sincerity of a woman like that is, in my mind, beyond dispute. And here she is recounting what could have turned out to be something totally different, which would have been a successful abduction of a child by a Sasquatch in the woods, something that's been reported by numerous indigenous tribes in North America. Lots of their oral histories talk about how these creatures were stealing children. And so that's one of those cases where, when you look at like the missing 411 cases and the sheer number of children that have gone missing in the national park system, and then you have a lady like this recounting what looks to have been an abduction attempt, you can start to put two and two together, and things begin to make a lot of sense. One of the seminal cases of the missing 411 cases, which David Paulides points out quite often, is called the berry picker cluster. And in his missing 411 profile points, you'll find berries and mushroom pickers often go missing. In one of these cases, a clue was left that isn't found in any of the other cases. And this is in the form of the parents of the child, who were very nearby and who heard the child emit a half scream before it sounded like it was muzzled. Those were their exact words. It's been proposed by Paulides that this could have been a case of a doorway, interdimensional doorway opening up, which is one of the theories as to why these people disappear. In my mind, the highest probability that is that what was muffling the child's scream was in fact a hand going over its mouth. And if that's true, and if all of the missing 411 cases are in fact related to one another, and the other berry picker cluster of people have gone missing in similar fashion, I think it's okay to assume that they probably came across the same thing that muffled that child's cry. And there's only a couple of cryptids that we are aware of that have a hand. And obviously Sasquatch is number one in all of that. The other thing is mushroom pickers. And I bring that up because there's a case out there some of you may be aware of. And I believe the gentleman's his last name was Froman. And he was in Washington picking wild mushrooms with his family. And he went off trail while they were kind of in a clearing getting mushrooms. He's picking mushrooms according to his own testimony. And he sees movement out of the corner of his eyes. He's looking down and he looks up, and he said that this large black thing came out of the tree like a bag of cement and hit the ground that hard. He said with its chest and everything just face planted. And then he saw one arm go up, another arm go up. It pushed itself up, and it came at him in a dead sprint on all fours. He had a pistol on him, and he took it out and he began to fire, which caused the creature to pause, and he was actually able to make his escape. And that's been recounted on a number of documentaries, so you may see it one of these days. So here's a couple of examples of people that are out foraging natural resources only to disappear. And it's quite possible that the Bigfoot species sees that as an encroachment on their food source. It begins to make a lot of sense. So that's really, really interesting stuff, guys. The other one with the hand would be the DogMan, but if you've been following the OSAP program and what they discovered there, it's clear to me that the origins of the DogMan are whatever the origins are of all of this other paranormal activity surrounding the UFOs. So I'm going to show you something here that I think you're going to like. It's a little bit shocking, really. And this is something that I actually published in Paranormal Planet and in Bigfoot Unleashed. So let's take a look here. Let me see if I can blow this up for you guys. Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to actually blow this up, but what's crazy is the fact that every one of these little dots that you see on here with the tag on it, those are all missing people in the national park system. Never been found again. Pull this up. And we'll take my old home state there of Colorado that I lived in forever. And you can see a cluster here, etc. The interesting thing about that is, and this was compiled by the Can-Am Missing Project and David Paulides. So these are all documented, chronicled missing person cases that fit the 411 profile. The other thing that they fit identically is the fact that when you overlay a map of all of the known cave systems in North America over this map of missing people, they are identical. When you take those two maps and you overlay a map of all of the known and documented Bigfoot sightings, they are identical. In the PIA, we say once is chance, twice coincidence, and 3 times is a pattern. And that's something that everybody should be wary of when it comes to the idea of cryptids and missing people. Now, I would be remiss not to remind you guys that, in fact, and I documented this in my book, there is a huge amount of evidence showing a relationship, some kind of relationship between ETs and Sasquatch. And recently, Linda Moulton Howe was on an interview recounting how in 1980, and she put this in her book, Glimpses of Other Realities, but in 1980, she was contacted by a rancher who claimed that he had a traumatic experience where he was weeding his garden. He heard this extremely loud buzzing noise that he said sounded like a million bees. All of a sudden, a silver disc appeared over the trees. He says he saw 2 columns of air, is how he put it, like swirling air, come down to the ground. And when it met the ground, 2 Bigfoot creatures manifested in front of him and walked into the woods. Now, she believed that this gentleman was telling the truth, and I know from studying the alien abduction phenomenon that quite a few of them have reported these creatures in the woods where they're abducted. I mean, that's just the evidence of it. So that's very interesting. So I'm going to show you something else, since we talk about dogmen all the time. And dogmen are kind of foremost right now in the crypto world. This is something not many people have seen, and this comes from the farmer who owns the land that runs along adjacent to Bray Road. So we're talking about the beast of Bray Road, which, in modern day DogMan lore put out by Linda Godfrey, is kind of ground zero for DogMan activity. So this, my friends, is the actual print of the beast of Bray Road. This was the print that creature left right after a sighting in fresh soil. And it is a 5-toed print with 7 pads, something never seen before in any canine species. Biologists have looked at it. They say it is all one print. We're left with, shaking our head going, oh my God, Now, the interesting thing about this farmer is that not only had he spotted the creature a number of times on his property, but he decided to put up hidden security cameras in hopes of getting video footage of it. And he put these cameras out, and what he ended up getting in one particular case was a cattle mutilation. It's interesting because on camera, and I've seen this, a mist forms, literally comes over to the dead animal, and as the mist dissipates, the animal's not there. That guy, he has that on camera. And it's been shown on a documentary on, if you have LNG channels or whatever, there's a channel on there called Dust that aired it recently. So he also reported a number of UFOs on the film. So here again, we have this UFO link, the same that was reported by Dr. Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, who were part of that OSAP program, not Knapp, but Colm Kelleher. And from the CIA agent known as Axelrod, whose family had 2 encounters. Now, Axelrod went home one day from work at the OSAP program, CIA agent. That's not his real name. You'll discover that every CIA agent has the name Axelrod when they're talked about publicly. It's very interesting. But he goes home. He takes this hitchhiker effect home with him. His wife, in the middle of the night, well, she said 10:45, 11 o'clock, goes to the kitchen sink to get a glass of water. She looks out of the window, and standing across their property next to a tree is a bipedal, dog-headed creature, standing upright, staring at her next to the tree. She panics, and she doesn't say anything. She doesn't know if she's going crazy or what's happening. The following Wednesday morning, at 10:45 in the morning, so you're talking about almost an exact opposite time of day, the 2 children were actually in the TV room, noticed a shadow movement by the window, look up, and there is yet again a dog-headed dogman staring at them through the window. The children described how it took off in a flash, and by the time they got to the window, all they could see were the leaves kicking up as it ran. The wife and mother, after that event, told the family of her experience, and they went out to the tree and they found physical trace evidence that had been left. So even though these things are part of the hitchhiker effect, they have a physical manifestation to them. So the mystery of the dogman gets deeper and deeper as we go. And we have to remember with hitchhiker effect, or the crystal entity as I call it, we have to begin to ask ourselves, what possible motive could a co-evolved entity on this planet have in presenting to us our worst fears? It's an interesting question to propose. Next on the list of really scary cryptids, guys, are these invisible, shimmering, the glimmermen, as they call them. I call them the predator entity because people describe them as looking exactly like the entity in the Predator movies. And I do have a film on the channel, and it's titled Invisible Predators in the Woods. There's also another film that's the update to that. I encourage you to take a look because there's actual footage of these things that people have captured. And there's no telling what they are. Um, you're seeing the shimmering of something walking by and it pushing plants, out of its way as it's going. And a lot of people think that Sasquatch has the ability to cloak itself into this invisibility, and that's something chronicled by the natives. So it might be that we're looking at that. But there is also a very interesting case involving these invisible predator guys. And this is something that was also chronicled by Paulides. And there's a famous ufologist and optical scientist, Dr. Maccabee is his name. I believe his name is, I think it's John Maccabee. And he has been on a number of UFO documentaries, examining UFO footage because of his expertise in optics and with camera equipment, etc. He's able to determine if something's been manipulated, and so they use his services like that. His wife, Jan Maccabee, is an avid deer hunter, and they have a 10-acre property that abuts a forest. And she goes out on her 10-acre property, way down in the corner of the property, seen a map of it, and climbs up in her deer stand, overlooking the woods. And she's sitting there enjoying herself, and everything's quiet. And she's trying to, glass around for deer. And she sees in the corner of her eye that same shimmering. And she turns her attention to it, and she can see full on the entire body image of this thing standing in a tree, looking right at her. She got a photograph of it, and that photograph has been published and it's out there on the web. If you probably Google Jan Maccabee predator picture, it might pull it up. What's crazy about the picture is that it just seems like sort of a weird amalgamation of different kinds of light, but on the very cusp, you can make out what appears to be long strands of hair off of its shoulder and its arm. So maybe that is Sasquatch cloaking itself. And that's, yet another predator that is out there. And we have to remember that this crystal entity, whatever it is, appears to be out there also predating on people. And I'll leave you with one really creepy case. And this was chronicled in all of these missing cases. In some of these cases, the people are found, but with zero recollection of what occurred to them or how they got to where they were. In some of the cases, the children are found an impossible distance from where they were taken. In one case, 2 mountain ranges away within the 24-hour period. But in one particular case, a boy was found that had gone missing. And he had the strangest tale of all to tell. And what he told the researchers was that he heard his grandmother's voice, and he turned around and there was his grandmother. And she took him into the woods to a cave, and inside the cave, he described his grandmother, as being a robot. He even says robot. He also described a number of what appeared to be equipment from various hunters, from hitchhiker or hikers. There's bags, there's hiking bags, there's old rusted guns and stuff like that around. And this robot grandmother, as he describes it, and this is a very young boy. For him to make up something like this is, completely insane. But she basically has him do all of these different things, and then she takes him back puts him into this bush of thorns and leaves, and that's where he's ended up being found. It's a very, very strange case. And it echoes some testimony that's out there from a few different hikers who claim that they have also heard something calling them in a voice that they recognize out there in the woods. So other than that, there is some interesting cases of possible large raptor attacks. Again, this is something that is reported every so often. Back in the 70s, there was a kid in Illinois who was literally almost taken by a very large bird. It was witnessed by his mother. This bird lifted him up 9-10 feet into the air before it let him go. It was described when it landed in the tree as being bigger than the top of the tree. And there are some Native American tales out there of the thunderbird, that comes in. And there's also just a lot of sightings of very large birds out there. And, a lot of people don't think that birds would predate a human being, but there are scientists in the Amazon who have recorded golden crowned eagles feeding off of monkeys. And they come down through the trees so fast that they literally just almost shear the skull right off. So you're talking about, a killing machine if you had a large bird like that. And not only that, but a lot of descriptions of these flying monsters come in sounding like teratorns. They sound like a pterodactyl. And that's been reported ever since, probably 1600s in this country. And I covered that. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys is the whole thing that Terrence McKenna was saying. Something we need to keep in mind as we go forward and continue to get data and intelligence from the guys that were involved in OSAP, is his quote. And he said, "We are in a symbiotic relationship with something that disguises itself as an alien invasion so as not to alarm us." Think about that tonight when you go to bed and see where that leads you in your thought process. It's something that I think about pretty much all the time right now. So join me next week, guys, on Paranormal Planet. I've got a good show for you planned, and I will put out that reminder here pretty soon. And until then, everybody stay safe out there. It has been a crazy world lately, and it's probably going to get a lot crazier. So I'll see you next week.